We've all met them. People utterly convinced of their own expertise despite glaring evidence to the contrary. The colleague who confidently derails meetings with misguided suggestions. The family member who becomes an instant expert after watching a single documentary. The internet commenter who argues with actual professionals as if they've spent a lifetime in the field. What fuels this strange disconnect between confidence and competence? The answer lies in a fascinating psychological phenomenon discovered just over 2 decades ago. In 1999, social psychologists David Dunning and Kruger published a groundbreaking study that forever changed how we understand human cognition. Their research uncovered a cognitive bias that now bears their names, the Dunning-Kruger effect, a phenomenon showing that the least skilled individuals in a domain often dramatically overestimate their abilities, while true experts tend to underestimate theirs. As Dunning himself famously said, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club. Today we'll dive deep into this psychological effect that touches us all in one way or another. We'll explore its origins, mechanisms, real-world examples, and, most importantly, how to spot and overcome it in ourselves. Because here's the paradox. The people most vulnerable to the Dunning-Kruger effect are also the least likely to recognize it in themselves. The discovery of the Dunning-Kruger effect began with an unusual bank robbery in 1995. A man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two Pittsburgh banks in broad daylight, no disguise, no attempt at concealment, robbed them, and walked right out. When police arrested him later that night, Wheeler was genuinely shocked to learn that surveillance cameras had caught his face. "But I wore the juice," he protested. Wheeler had smeared lemon juice on his skin, believing it would make him invisible to cameras. His logic? Lemon juice can be used as invisible ink, so naturally it must work on faces too. This bizarre case fascinated David Dunning. How could someone be so deeply wrong, yet so completely confident? Intrigued, Dunning partnered with graduate student Kruger to investigate the phenomenon systematically. In their now famous study, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, participants were tested on humor, grammar, and logical reasoning skills. After each test, they estimated how well they had performed compared to others. The results were striking and consistent. Those in the bottom quartile dramatically overestimated their performance, believing they had outperformed 62% of peers, when in reality, they had only outperformed 12%. Meanwhile, top performers tended to underestimate their relative ability. As Dunning explained, if you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. This creates a double burden of incompetence. Not only do people lack the skills to perform well, they also lack the self-awareness to see their own deficiency. At its core, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a metacognitive blind spot, a failure to accurately assess one's own knowledge and skills. This illusion of superiority is stubborn, often resistant even to clear evidence. It operates through several key psychological mechanisms. 1. The unknown unknowns problem. When we step into unfamiliar territory, we don't even realize the full scope of what we don't know. As Dunning explains, the skills you need to produce the right answer are exactly the same skills you need to evaluate if an answer is right. Without expertise, we also lack the ability to recognize it or to see its absence in ourselves. 2. Confirmation bias. Once we form a belief about our abilities, we tend to notice only the evidence that supports it, while ignoring anything that contradicts it. A novice who thinks they're skilled will remember their successes, blame failures on external factors, and interpret vague feedback as praise. 3. Faulty self-calibration. Even when trying to be objective, humans struggle to evaluate themselves without clear reference points. In the absence of strong feedback, we tend to rate ourselves above average, a bias known as the above-average effect or illusory superiority. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once put it perfectly. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. This captures the essence of the Dunning-Kruger effect. At the far ends of the knowledge spectrum, confidence and competence often move in opposite directions. While pop culture sometimes oversimplifies it as a neat, inverse line between skill and self-belief, The real pattern is far more nuanced. Researchers have found a distinct characteristic curve that maps the relationship. One we'll explore next. The journey from novice to expert often begins atop what some call Mount Stupid, the peak of confidence experienced by absolute beginners. At this stage, they've learned just enough to feel informed, yet remain unaware of the vast terrain they've yet to explore. As Mark Twain wisely put it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. From this peak, reality soon delivers a humbling blow. Continued learning reveals the true depth of the subject, sending confidence plunging into the valley of despair. Here many give up, unable to reconcile their inflated self-image with the harsh truth of their limitations. But those who persist begin the slow, steady climb up the slope of enlightenment, where competence and confidence grow together through practice and persistence. Eventually, they reach the plateau of sustainability, a stage where high skill is matched by appropriately calibrated confidence. Interestingly, true experts often display slight underconfidence compared to their actual abilities. This humility stems from their deep awareness of the complexity and nuance in their field. They understand not only what they know, but also the vastness of what they do not. As Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman once said, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong." This intellectual humility is a hallmark of genuine expertise, a stark contrast to the overconfidence of novices. While much of the experimental evidence for the Dunning-Kruger effect comes from lab studies and academic skill tests, it extends far beyond these settings, influencing nearly every sphere of human endeavor. In the workplace, it can take the form of the unskilled yet unaware employee who consistently overestimates their performance. One study found that 95% of managers believed they ranked in the top half of their peer group, a statistical impossibility. This inflated self-image often fuels resistance to feedback, stunts professional growth, and creates friction with colleagues. In healthcare, the stakes are even higher. Medical students with the lowest skill levels often overrate their clinical competence, risking dangerous overconfidence in diagnosis and treatment. One study revealed that the most confident doctors were no more accurate than their peers, yet they were less likely to seek second opinions or consult references. In politics, the effect explains why some of the most forceful voices on complex policy issues often display the least nuanced understanding. Those with only rudimentary knowledge of economics, climate science, or international relations may speak with absolute certainty, while true experts in these fields openly acknowledge the uncertainties and limitations that remain. In our digital age, the Dunning-Kruger effect thrives. Social media platforms give individuals with minimal expertise the ability to broadcast their opinions to vast audiences, often with the same apparent authority as established experts. While this democratization of voice has many benefits, it has also fueled what some call an expertise crisis, a flattening of the perceived gap between novice and expert. As astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson observes, one of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong. The expression of the Dunning-Kruger effect is not identical across cultures. Research shows that cultural values significantly shape how people assess their own abilities and how strongly the effect appears. In Western societies, particularly the United States, self-promotion and confidence are celebrated. From childhood, people are taught to believe in themselves, which, while empowering, can also encourage overestimation of abilities. The American ethos of individual achievement may unintentionally magnify the Dunning-Kruger effect by rewarding positive self-assessment regardless of objective performance. By contrast, many East Asian cultures emphasize humility, self-improvement, and awareness of limitations. Studies show that Japanese students often rate themselves below average on many measures, the opposite of the above-average effect common in the West. This tendency towards self-criticism may help buffer against the Dunning-Kruger effect, fostering more realistic self-assessments. Cultural orientation matters too. In collectivist societies where harmony and group consensus are prioritized, individuals may be more open to feedback and less inclined to cling to inflated self-views that conflict with the group. As Confucius wisely noted, Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Cultures that weave this principle into their education and social systems naturally cultivate the self-awareness that guards against the Dunning-Kruger trap. However, no society is completely immune. The core challenge, not knowing what you don't know, transcends cultural boundaries, even if its expression varies. While the Dunning-Kruger effect warns us of the perils of overconfidence, it's important to remember that confidence itself is not the enemy. In fact, a healthy degree of self-belief is essential for motivation, perseverance, and achievement. Confidence only becomes problematic when it's wildly out of sync with actual ability. When this misalignment grows too large, it can lead to poor decisions, resistance to learning, and unnecessary conflict with others. On the other hand, appropriate confidence, grounded in realistic self-assessment, is highly adaptive and strongly linked to success. Performance psychology consistently shows that optimal performance requires a moderate level of confidence, enough to inspire action and persistence, but not so much that it blinds us to mistakes or blindsides us to areas for improvement. This calibrated confidence is the sweet spot where self-belief aligns with reality. Interestingly, research suggests that slightly overestimating one's abilities, by just a small margin, can actually be beneficial in some situations. This mild, positive illusion can boost motivation, help overcome initial hurdles, and increase persistence in the face of setbacks. The key difference is this: slight overconfidence can be fuel. Excessive overconfidence, the kind seen in the Dunning-Kruger effect, is a liability. As psychologist Albert Bandura observed, people who have a sense of self-efficacy bounce back from failures. They approach things in terms of how to handle them rather than worrying about what can go wrong. This healthy confidence is a far cry from the unfounded certainty of those trapped in the Dunning-Kruger cycle. The challenge, then, isn't to eliminate confidence. It's to cultivate it in proportion to actual ability, blending self-efficacy with what psychologists call epistemic humility, the awareness of both our strengths and our limits. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of the Dunning-Kruger effect is recognizing it in ourselves. By design, the bias blinds us to our own incompetence. It's a stubborn cognitive blind spot that resists self-awareness. The first step to breaking free is acknowledging a hard truth. No one, regardless of intelligence, education, or experience, is immune to overestimating their abilities in unfamiliar domains. As intellectual historian Robert Burton warns, the feeling of knowing is not a reliable guide to whether or not you actually know something. Practical strategies to counteract the effect include: 1. Actively seek feedback, especially from experts in the field. Outside perspectives can reveal blind spots that self-assessment can't detect. 2. Be open to criticism. This requires temporarily setting aside defensive reactions and truly listening. 3. Engage in deliberate practice. Focus on specific weaknesses paired with clear and immediate feedback. Without feedback, practice can actually reinforce overconfidence rather than correct it. 4. Cultivate metacognitive awareness. Think about your thinking. Regularly reflect on what you don't know, and how you might be wrong. 5. Develop comfort with uncertainty. Resist the pressure to have instant answers. As Socrates famously put it, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. This willingness to say, "I don't know," or "I'm not sure," especially in a culture that rewards quick, confident assertions, is a form of intellectual courage. Writer and philosopher Aldous Huxley once noted that men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons that history has to teach. Similarly, the Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us one of life's most important lessons: question your certainty, especially when you feel most confident. Our modern information ecosystem adds new dimensions to the problem. The internet has democratized access to knowledge, allowing anyone to quickly gain a surface-level familiarity with almost any subject. But this easy access can create an illusion of understanding that amplifies the Dunning-Kruger effect. Social media compounds the problem by rewarding confident assertions over nuanced expertise. Algorithms favor bold, unequivocal statements that drive engagement, not careful, qualified analysis. This dynamic creates an environment where the loudest, most confident voices often rise to prominence, regardless of actual skill or accuracy. Filter bubbles and echo chambers make things worse, shielding individuals from contradictory perspectives that might challenge their perceived expertise. When everyone around you shares your level of understanding or misunderstanding, it's far harder to see your own limitations. The sheer volume of available information also fuels what researchers call knowledge fragmentation, the accumulation of isolated facts without the deeper frameworks needed to truly understand them. This can produce the feeling of knowing without its substance. As author Tom Nichols warns in The Death of Expertise, the internet lets us contact and interact with many more people than we would normally encounter in our daily lives. And yet, more contact doesn't necessarily mean more understanding. While the Dunning-Kruger effect operates at the individual level, its cumulative impact can reshape societies, institutions, and public discourse in profound ways. In democratic systems, the effect can influence elections when voters with limited policy knowledge confidently judge complex proposals through superficial understanding. This opens the door to simplistic solutions for multifaceted problems and leaves electorates vulnerable to populist rhetoric that trades nuance for certainty. In organizational life, the effect can distort hiring and promotion decisions. Candidates with limited competence but high confidence often outshine more skilled yet modest individuals. Over time, this can create confidence cascades, where an entire workplace culture rewards the display of certainty over actual performance. In science communication and public health, the effect fuels resistance to expert guidance when individuals with minimal subject knowledge feel as qualified to interpret evidence as trained specialists. This dynamic became especially visible during the COVID-19 pandemic, when confident non-experts publicly challenged health recommendations based on limited and often flawed interpretations of epidemiology. The effect also reaches into education, when students or parents with strong opinions but limited pedagogical knowledge push for approaches that contradict evidence-based practices. The result can undermine both teaching effectiveness and trust in professional educators. Philosopher Hannah Arendt once observed, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists." While far less extreme, the erosion of epistemic authority caused by the Dunning-Kruger effect can create similar vulnerabilities in democratic societies. Addressing these broader implications requires both individual growth and systemic reform. At the personal level, cultivating metacognitive skills, intellectual humility, and openness to feedback. At the institutional level, building systems that clearly differentiate confidence from competence, reward humility alongside ability, and improve how specialized knowledge is evaluated and communicated. The journey through the Dunning-Kruger effect reveals a fundamental paradox of human knowledge. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. As our circle of knowledge expands, so does its perimeter of contact with the unknown. This paradox explains the trajectory we've traced, from the unearned confidence of novices to the calibrated uncertainty of experts. It's why true mastery is rarely marked by absolute certainty, but instead by comfort with complexity, nuance, and the limits of what can be known. Understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect offers a powerful lens for self-reflection. It reminds us that the path to genuine knowledge begins with acknowledging our limitations and embracing the discomfort of uncertainty. It challenges us to cultivate both the confidence to act and the humility to learn. In a world increasingly filled with confident voices offering overly simple answers, this awareness becomes more valuable than ever. It helps us distinguish between hollow confidence and earned expertise in ourselves and in others. Perhaps most importantly, understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect can foster a more compassionate view of human error. Recognizing that overconfidence often stems not from arrogance, but from the natural structure of how knowledge is acquired, allows us to approach disagreements with greater patience and intellectual charity. As physicist Richard Feynman once remarked, "I believe that a scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy." From one of history's greatest scientific minds, this humility captures the essence of the Dunning-Kruger lesson. Wisdom begins not with certainty, but with the recognition of how much we have yet to learn. By embracing this paradox, that deeper knowledge reveals deeper ignorance, and that true understanding unveils complexity, we open ourselves to richer learning, more productive discourse, and a more accurate calibration between confidence and competence. And in doing so, we take our first real step toward overcoming the very bias we've been exploring.